All right, so let's get into it. Big thanks to LitRPG Reads and Paul Bello Fine Fellow for this awesome article they had on crafting unforgettable dungeon maps. It really got me thinking. I remember this one session we were exploring this ancient temple. It was all swallowed up by the jungle, and the map was incredible. Crumbling walls and hidden chambers,
Yep.
and this just ominous feeling like something was watching us. It turned out the whole temple was this giant living creature. Every room was like an organ, and the corridors were veins. Talk about creepy. It made the whole session completely unforgettable.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of how a map is way more than just lines on a page. It really is like a springboard for your imagination, a blueprint for the atmosphere, and a tool for creating those truly memorable experiences. And that's what we're going to unpack today, those 12 essential features that really elevate a dungeon map from just good to legendary, all pulled from this LitRPG Reads article.
Love it. And the best place to start is, of course, with the entrances and the exits. Those first impressions are so important. This article has some really evocative examples. An archway of shadows, a hidden hatch that goes down into a dusty crypt, a swirling misty portal. I mean, if you were a player about to enter a dungeon, which one would immediately grab your attention?
That's really interesting that you mentioned first impressions, because there's a whole psychological element there. The entry point really sets the stage. It influences player expectations and even shapes how they'll see the entire dungeon. Think about it, a shadowy archway that suggests mystery and danger, or maybe like a hidden hatch that hints at secrets and stealth. Even just like the shape of the entrance can influence the mood. A narrow and kind of claustrophobic passage might give you anxiety, while a grand open archway could make you feel awe.
It's like the opening scene of a movie, setting the tone and hinting at what might be coming next.
Whew.
But unlike a movie in D&D, the players have agency. They get to choose how to enter, where to go, and how the story unfolds. And that's where well-designed exits come in. They're not just about escaping the dungeon. It's more about closure, that feeling of accomplishment, even tying the experience back to the larger campaign world.
Totally. Think of the exit as the final punctuation mark on the dungeon's story. Maybe it's a triumphant return back to the surface, a dramatic escape through a collapsing tunnel, or even a mysterious portal to a whole new plane of existence. And just like the entrance sets the tone, the exit gives a lasting impression. It shapes how the players reflect on the experience and what they ultimately take away from it.
Okay, so we've talked about grand entrances and the dramatic exits. Now let's talk about all the stuff in between, the meat of the dungeon, if you will. This article talks about the importance of landmarks. I have to say, this one really speaks to me.
Yeah, landmarks are super crucial for a few reasons. First, they act as navigational anchors. So they help players figure out where they are in the dungeon's layout. Think about it like the Eiffel Tower or the Statue of Liberty. They're these instantly recognizable points of reference that help you understand where you are in this larger space. In a dungeon, this could be a colossal statue in a central chamber, a fountain of illusions, or even just like a gnarled ancient tree growing through the ceiling of a ruined hall.
That's funny you should mention that, because landmarks are even powerful outside of dungeons. Think about your own city or town. There are probably certain statues, buildings, or even just natural formations that are important, right? Maybe there's a story attached to them, or a local legend, or a historical event. Those details change them from just objects into something more, something really memorable.
Exactly. Landmarks in a dungeon can totally do the same thing. They can be focal points for storytelling, world building, and even emotional resonance. Imagine a towering statue of a fallen king, its eyes glowing with this eerie light, or maybe a whispering fountain that grants you visions of the past. These elements add depth, intrigue, and a sense of history to the dungeon, making it feel like a real, lived-in space.
Landmarks are like little breadcrumbs of stories scattered throughout the dungeon, leading players deeper into its mysteries. But sometimes the most rewarding discoveries are the ones that are off the beaten path, the ones that make you feel like a real explorer stumbling upon something hidden and amazing. And this brings us to the article's discussion of secret areas, those little nooks and crannies that beckon with promises of adventure and reward. I mean, who doesn't love finding a secret passage or uncovering a forgotten treasure chamber?
Hidden areas are fantastic. They reward players for being curious and encourage them to think outside the box. They add that element of surprise and delight to the exploration. And you can tailor them to fit the theme of your dungeon and what your players are into. Imagine the thrill of discovering a secret library filled with ancient books, or a vault overflowing with magical artifacts, or even like a cursed burial chamber guarded by ghosts.
Oh, man, the possibilities really are endless. I remember this one game where we found this hidden passage. It was behind a waterfall, and it led to this lush underground grotto with bioluminescent fungi and pools of crystal clear water. It felt like we'd stumbled into this secret paradise, like a hidden world totally untouched by the darkness of the dungeon above.
And that's the best part about hidden areas. They can take players to these unexpected places, introducing new environments, challenges, and rewards. It's all about creating a sense of discovery, that feeling of uncovering something truly special and unique. But it's important to find a good balance between challenge and reward. Like, if a discovery is too easy, it won't feel as good. But if it's too difficult, players will get frustrated and just give up.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like that perfect difficulty in a video game where the challenge is hard enough to make you feel good, but not so hard that it feels impossible. Speaking of challenge, let's talk about the stuff that makes a dungeon really dangerous. Monster layers, traps, and resource points. Now, this is where it gets tactical, right?
For sure. These elements all work together to create this dynamic and engaging dungeon experience. Think of it like a really well choreographed dance, with the monsters giving you the high energy bursts, traps adding in those moments of suspense and surprise, and the resource points offering up a little bit of respite and strategic planning.
So like putting a healing potion right before a hard encounter, or setting a trap to protect a treasure chest.
Exactly. It's all about creating that sense of risk and reward, pushing players to think strategically and make choices that really affect their progress. And where you put these elements is super important. A trap in the right spot can change a battle. And a well-placed resource point can give players exactly what they need to beat a tough challenge.
It's like playing chess, but with more goblins and fireballs.
And speaking of needing to use your brain, we can't forget about puzzles. Now, I've got to be honest, I've had some pretty frustrating experiences with puzzles in D&D. Sometimes they feel like they're just there to make players confused and slow the game down.
Yeah, but puzzles, when you do them right, can be so rewarding. They offer up a different type of challenge, engaging the players' minds and their problem-solving skills. And they can be so much more than just riddles or logic problems. Think about these complicated machines that need to be figured out, hidden messages written in old languages, or even puzzles that use the environment and force the players to work with what's around them. You know what? Now that you mention it, I remember this one puzzle where we had to line up a bunch of mirrors to reflect moonlight onto this one spot. It was tricky, but when we finally got it, it felt amazing. It's like that aha moment when you finally figure it out. And it wasn't just about solving the puzzle, it was about how the puzzle fit into the story and the atmosphere of the dungeon. It felt like it belonged there, not just some random obstacle.
That's exactly it. Puzzles should feel like they're a part of the dungeon, not just some challenge you threw in there to make it harder. And they should offer different types of challenges to make sure all different types of players have something they can do well. Some players love logic puzzles, while others might be better at figuring out codes or spatial stuff.
And it's not just about those brain teasers either. This article also says that those little details are so important to bring a dungeon to life, like the dripping ivy clinging to the walls, the warped columns that make you think about some big event that happened there a long time ago, the faint smell of decay.
Those little touches are essential. They create immersion and that sense of wonder. Think of them like little brush strokes in a painting, adding texture and depth and feeling to the whole picture. And they can be anything: visual, auditory, olfactory, anything that grabs the player's senses and pulls them into the world you've created. Like, imagine the sound of water dripping in a cave, the musty smell of damp earth and rotting wood, or the faint glow of phosphorescent moss lighting up a hidden passage.
It's like the difference between saying it was a dark and spooky dungeon,
Yeah.
and actually making the players feel the cobwebs, see the shadows from the flickering torches, and feel the cold draft coming through the cracks. Those details make it real.
Yeah.
Turn a boring space into something unique and memorable.
You got it. It's about going beyond just what the map does and creating something that fires up the imagination. And that's where world building comes in. It's about weaving together all those sensory details, historical references, and really descriptive language to make a world that feels real and full of possibilities.
And those possibilities are shaped by the paths players choose to take, the encounters they have, and ultimately the big battles that test their strength and their smarts. Which brings us to what this article says about pathways, encounter zones, and boss arenas. It's like we're going from those small details to the big picture of the dungeon.
Exactly. Think of pathways like the veins of your dungeon. They control how the exploration and the combat flows. Pathways give players choices, letting them come up with a plan and try out different routes, like will they go down the winding corridor that seems safer, or the narrow passage that might be a shortcut. or a trap.
It's like designing a roller coaster. You're building up the excitement with every turn. And then there are those areas that are made for combat, puzzles, or even just role-playing, what the article calls encounter zones. It's like setting a rhythm for the dungeon, right? Like a well-planned dance with moments of tension and then relief.
Totally. Instead of just random encounters popping up anywhere, you're putting them in specific spots throughout the dungeon so everything feels more planned out. You're crafting an experience instead of just throwing a bunch of random stuff at them. And then, of course, you've got the big finale, the boss arena. This is where everything we've talked about comes together for that final battle.
No, man, the boss arena. This is where the story reaches its peak, where the heroes face their toughest challenge, and where legends are made. It's not just about tossing a big bad monster into a room, right? This article says you should make a space that's both impressive to look at and also really challenging.
Exactly. The boss arena should be the best part of the whole dungeon, this memorable and challenging ending to their adventure. It should fit the theme of the dungeon, and it should use things that players have seen along the way. Imagine a volcanic throne room where the boss can make lava erupt, or an underground tomb where the undead crawl out of the ground, or even a mountain peak with howling wind and lightning strikes.
It's like the last boss fight in a video game. You're using all the skills and knowledge you've picked up along the way to beat the hardest challenge. And to help DMs keep track of all this awesome stuff, the article talks about notes and annotations. It's like a secret language only the DM knows.
Having good notes is so important. It's like a chef having everything organized in their kitchen. It lets them focus on making a fantastic meal. And it's not just about making things easy. A well-annotated map can give you new ideas and plot twists while you're running the game.
So it's like having a cheat sheet and a way to come up with new ideas all in one. But wouldn't having too many notes just be too much? Where's the line between helpful reminders and just too much information?
That's a good point. I think it's about balance. You don't want to plan out every little detail, but having the important stuff written down lets you focus on being creative and reacting to what the players do. It's all about finding what works for you. Some DMs like to write down a lot of details, while others keep it simple.
It's like any creative thing you do. You have to find the tools and methods that let you express your vision. And speaking of vision, not everyone is an artist. What about those of us who can barely draw stick figures? Are we stuck with boring, grid-based maps?
Not at all. There are a ton of resources out there to help DMs create amazing maps, even if they can't draw. Online tools and software have pre-made stuff and templates so you can just drag and drop things to make a basic layout. Then you can add your own personal touches like symbols, labels, and even hand-drawn stuff if you're feeling ambitious.
Well, you can keep it simple or go crazy depending on how much time you have and how good you are.
Exactly. And don't forget about good old-fashioned graph paper. It's been around forever for a reason. Graph paper gives you structure for sketching out your ideas and making sure everything is the right size. And you can get really creative with it too, like using different colored pencils or markers to make areas stand out or just make it look more interesting.
I love that. It's about finding what works for you and not being afraid to try new things. And if all else fails, you can always just do everything in your imagination. No map needed. But let's be real, a well-made map can really make the game better for everyone.
Absolutely. A well-crafted map is more than just lines on paper. It's a gateway to another world, a spark for imagination and adventure. It can make you feel wonder, mystery, even fear, and it can help players feel like they're really exploring a living, breathing world.
And it's not something you have to do alone. Do you ever have your players give you ideas or suggestions for the map?
All the time. I think it's really important to get your players involved in building the world. It makes them feel like they're a part of it. You can give them a basic idea of the dungeon and then ask for their thoughts on certain features, encounters, or even just backstory elements.
So like, hey, I'm thinking about putting a secret room in this part of the dungeon. What kind of treasure do you think might be hidden there? Or, I'm picturing a really tricky trap in this hallway. What kind of trap would be super sneaky? That's a great way to get everyone thinking creatively.
Exactly. You might be surprised by how clever and original their ideas are. Players often have amazing imaginations, and they really understand their characters. And by using their ideas, you're not only making the game more fun for them, you're also making the storytelling more collaborative.
It's like everyone is working together to write the adventure, each person adding their own unique perspective and creativity. Which brings us to a really interesting point, the story potential of dungeon maps. It's not just about how it's laid out and how things work. It's about how you use the map to tell a story, build suspense, reveal secrets, and even guide how the players feel throughout the adventure.
That's a really great point. Dungeon maps can be powerful tools for telling a story. They can be used to hint at things to come, uncover hidden information, and even shape the emotional journey of the players. Imagine a dungeon map with a bunch of really elaborate traps. This might tell you that the person who made the dungeon was super paranoid or obsessed with security, which might suggest there's a deeper story behind why they built it in the first place.
Oh, I like that. It's like dropping clues that players can figure out as they go through the dungeon. Or you could have a map with a symbol or design that keeps showing up. This symbol could represent a powerful artifact, a lost civilization, or even some evil force that's controlling things. It's all about those subtle hints that make players feel like they're uncovering a bigger mystery.
Exactly. Or you could have a map with something that seems totally normal, like a fountain or statue. But then when players try to use it, they find out it's actually a magic portal or a hidden trap. These unexpected twists and turns can be really fun for players. They feel like they've found something truly hidden and valuable.
And what about using maps to make the players feel certain emotions? Like, how can a map make them feel awe, dread, or even hope?
Well, imagine a map that starts with these really tight and cramped hallways. It would make you feel claustrophobic and scared. But as the players move through the dungeon, the hallways gradually open up into these huge halls and chambers, symbolizing how they're getting stronger and more confident. Or you could use lighting and color to show changes in mood and atmosphere. Like a dungeon that starts with dark and gloomy colors could shift to brighter and more vibrant colors as they get closer to the final room, showing them that there's hope and they're close to winning.
It's like their journey through the dungeon reflects their own personal growth. They start out feeling trapped and unsure, but as they overcome challenges and level up, the world literally opens up to them. It's crazy how much you can communicate just through the visuals of a map.
I know, right? It's all about thinking outside the box and using the map to create a really vivid and engaging picture for your players. And speaking of how maps have changed over time, it's interesting to see how they've evolved along with tabletop role-playing games themselves.
You're right. In the early days of D&D, maps were usually pretty basic and focused on practicality, like sketches on graph paper with simple symbols for rooms and corridors. But as the genre has grown up, maps have become more complex and immersive. They've incorporated art, storytelling, and even technology.
Totally. We now have these incredible digital maps with 3D models, fancy lighting, and even things you can interact with. It's like you're stepping into a virtual reality dungeon. But even with all these advancements, I think the basics of good map design are still important. Having a fancy digital map is useless if it's not well organized, easy to understand, and fun for the players.
It's about finding the right balance between looking good and working well, making a map that's both visually stunning and tells a good story. And that's what this deep dive has been all about, realizing how important dungeon maps are to making tabletop RPGs memorable and exciting.
Absolutely. A well-made map is way more than just a tool to tell you where to go. It's a foundation for storytelling, a spark for imagination, and a shared space for everyone to go on an adventure together.
It's like a blank canvas that when you add creativity and thoughtfulness, turns into a world of endless possibilities. And that's what makes dungeon maps so timeless and captivating. They invite us to explore, discover, and create stories that we'll remember for years to come.
And speaking of sharing and remembering, I think it's time to start wrapping up this amazing deep dive. Okay, but before we go, I want to leave you with something to think about, something to ponder as you get started on your own dungeon map adventures. If you could only choose one thing from everything we talked about today, what would you focus on when making a dungeon map? What's that one special element that turns a good map into an unforgettable one for you? That is a great question to leave our listeners with. It really makes you think about what's most important to you as both players and creators.
Exactly. Is it that thrill of exploration you get from a really cleverly designed layout? Or the way you strategically place monster lairs and traps that keeps your players on edge? Or maybe it's those tiny but powerful details that bring the dungeon to life, like the smell of incense coming from a secret shrine, or the sound of wind blowing through a broken archway.
What I love about dungeon map design is that there's no single right answer. It's all about finding what gets you excited and then using those things to make an experience that's both fun and memorable. And just like every dungeon master has their own way of doing things, every player has their own preferences and things they like.
That's so true. Some players love fighting monsters, while others would rather solve puzzles and find secrets. Some are really into the history and lore of the world, while others just want to roleplay and focus on their characters. And a really good dungeon map can be designed to include all those things.
For sure. And that's why this topic is so interesting. It's not just about drawing lines on a grid. It's about creating a place where stories can happen, where players can become heroes, and where they make memories that last.
That's a great way to put it. And we really want to hear from you. Head over to the comments and tell us what element you would focus on when making a dungeon map. We're excited to see what creative ideas you come up with.
And of course, a huge thank you to Paul Bello, fine fellow, for inspiring this deep dive with that fantastic article. His insights really got us thinking about the art and skill of dungeon map design.
I totally agree. Until next time, may your dungeons be deep, your maps be legendary, and your adventures be unforgettable.